Welcome to Squash 101. My name is Linda Sperry. I'm a Kent County Master Gardener. The basic information I will be providing today is from my area, Zone 7 in Delaware. If you reside elsewhere, you will need to do a search of your zip code for more precise growing date information, or contact your local extension office. When growing squash, you'll need to plan for your crop. You'll need to give some thought to how many people you will be feeding. One of the pitfalls of growing squash is that they tend to come all at one time, much faster than you can use them. Things to consider: one option is to donate the excess to your local food bank. Another option is to plant only what you will need, and to determine this, you should refer to the yield information per plant. This is usually found in the plant seed description. Once you determine your needs, plant accordingly. There's no need to have an avalanche of squash that you can't use. Use that space for other crops or plant flowers to draw pollinators and keep away pests. Some other things to consider: how much full sun space do you have? Do you plan on preserving some of your crop? Will you be available to monitor your plants at least twice a week and available to water and fertilize as often as needed? Squash are in the Cucurbitaceae genus of herbaceous vines in the gourd family and are native to the Andes and Mesoamerica. There are 3 species of squash: Cucurbita pepo, moscata, and maxima. Squash are further broken down into summer and winter squashes. The summer squash is harvested in the summer before reaching its maturity, and the reason for this is they'll be more tender and have smaller and fewer seeds. Summer squash have edible skin, a short maturity date, and a very short shelf life. Remember I mentioned yield? Normally you can expect to get 8 to 12 pounds of squash, summer squash, from a plant. Zucchini, for example, can push out bumper crops, so 1 to 2 plants are usually enough. There are 4 types of summer squash: straight neck, crook neck, zucchini types, which are usually the most popular, and scallop. Winter squash is harvested in autumn before the first hard freeze. It has a hard rind, a maturity date as long as up to 110 days, a long shelf life, with some keeping as much as 3+ months. Most of the winter squash are vining, and they have very heavy fruits with very heavy yields. There are 5 types of winter squash: Hubbard's, butternut, gold nugget, acorn, and buttercup. Consider starting your squash from seeds instead of buying plants. Besides being less expensive, plants you started from seeds in your area will be better acclimated to your local conditions. So you're shopping for seeds now. Once you have decided how many plants of each type that you will need, take a closer look at the seed descriptions. When selecting your seeds, check for the following attributes. Are the seeds heirloom, which means they've been around for generations and haven't changed? Are they hybrids, an offspring of 2 different plants? Are they open pollinated seeds, meaning that they will breed true when pollinated and be identical to their parents? Are they organic, grown without pesticides, herbicides, or synthetic fertilizers? And are they treated seeds, a chemical typically antimicrobial or fungicidal with which the seeds are treated? This last type, treated, may be what you should be buying if you're having pest and disease problems, as many will be resistant to those problems, and although not 100% foolproof, at least the plant will be less likely to be severely affected. Like almost all veggies, squash require a full sun of 6 hours plus a day, and squash should be sheltered from wind if possible. Your soil needs to be well draining, but kept moist, not wet, usually about 1 inch per week of water. But you may have to tweak this according to your weather conditions. Squash are suitable for growing in in-ground beds, raised beds, and container and grow bags. Keep in mind that squash are heavy feeders, so scatter fertilizer when you're planting. You have 2 methods for planting squash seeds. The first, and probably the best choice, is direct sowing into the garden. This is best done when air temperatures are at least 70+ degrees, and after the last frost date for my zone, which is zone 7, after April 17th. Your soil temperature should be 60+ degrees at a minimum at the 2-inch level, and I recommend you have a soil thermometer to check this. To speed up germination, some gardeners like to soak seeds up to 24 hours before planting. Now, the second option is indoor sowing, which is done 2 to 4 weeks before the last frost or your planned planting date. The seeds will germinate faster this way because they're kept warmer, but the seedlings must be hardened off a couple weeks before being transplanted into the garden. And again, the air and soil temperatures mentioned for direct sowing apply here as well. Excellent! You have your first blooms. The first time I planted squash, I freaked out because all I saw coming day after day were male flowers. It was a few years later that I learned that the first blooms will be male flowers. And this is the time to apply a small side dressing of fertilizer. Fertilize again when fruits start to appear or when the vines start to run. If your weather has been cool, damp, or you're not seeing pollinators, you will need to hand pollinate the blossoms. You can do this with a tiny fine bristled paintbrush. Go to the male flower, collect the pollen on the brush, and then go to the female flower, put the brush deeply into the very center of the female flower with the pollen-laden bristles. Now, the main pollinator of squash for me seems to be bumblebees, although there are actual squash bees. In the early morning, I go out to check my plants, and I always find the bumblebees inside the flowers sound asleep. This is what you will be checking for on your plants. Striped cucumber or spotted cucumber beetles, which are the most destructive pests of cucumbers and squash in the Mid-Atlantic. And winter squash seem to have more pest issues due in part for the longer growing season. Some of the top pests we're going to cover are cucumber beetles, squash bugs, and the squash vine borer. Now, disease issues are about the same for both types of squash. The most prevalent diseases are downy mildew, powdery mildew, and viruses. On this slide is the life cycle of a cucumber beetle. I've given you this so you'll know what to look for on your young seedlings. The first generation comes in May as the beetles move on to crops. They feed and lay eggs. 2 to 3 weeks, they attack the roots and move to the soil. And then the second generation comes later in the summer. Older plants are far less susceptible to disease transmission, and some evidence indicates that the cucumber beetles may also transmit certain plant viruses, and both of these beetle types are vectors for bacterial wilt. Insecticides should be applied before the beetles feed extensively on the first true leaves, and if you're within a week or two of the honeybee placement or pollination, it's a good idea to switch to foliar sprays of Asail, Pyrethroid, or Diamide. For a list of approved pesticides, I provided the link for integrated pest management on the resources page. Melon aphids. Thankfully, I've never experienced them. They will transmit a mosaic virus, and if you have the aphids in your area, I recommend using a mosaic-resistant winter squash cultivar. You can treat for these aphids, and one of the clues to know whether you need to or not is if you see honeydew or a sooty black mold on the leaves, that's a clue. If you're going to use your spray, use like an insecticidal soap or a neem mixture, being careful to mix it according to instructions. Also be very, very careful not to spray the soap or the neem on flowers or on your pollinators. Now we get on to the nasties, squash bugs. They will pierce the leaf surfaces with their sharp mouth parts and suck plant sap, while at the same time they're injecting toxins into the plant. Look for wilted, yellow, or burnt-looking leaves. So you'll know what to be looking for. Here's a great photo of a female squash bug laying her eggs. The other photo, oh my gosh, it's an army of squash bugs. Let your guard down just a little bit, and this is what you may end up with. Females start appearing in early June and continue to lay eggs through midsummer. These eggs hatch in about 10 days. You need to continue checking for eggs on leaves at least twice a week and look on both sides of the leaf. Now you can rub or scrape off the eggs. And if you find adults, knock them off into a bucket of soapy water. Next, we have the king of the nasties for me. It's the squash vine borer. Borer moths lay eggs at the base of the plants starting in late June, and this goes on through the first few weeks of July. These moths are easily noticed as you will hear them making some kind of a buzzing noise when they fly around the plant, which is not normal for a moth. These eggs hatch and the borers quickly move into the base of the stem at the soil level. They bore into the stem and feed inside the stem, disrupting the water and nutrient flow. Insecticidal sprays need to be directed to the base of the plant for several weeks when they're being used. When looking for signs of squash vine borers, look for wilting plants or runners. You should also look for excrement being pushed out of a tiny hole. It looks sort of like sawdust. You can mitigate your loss by making a second planting of summer squash in early July. Plants will mature after adult borers have finished laying their eggs. You can also try to remove a borer from the stem and replant the cut portion of the stem in the soil. I haven't had much luck with this process. If your plant is infected with a borer, promptly pull and destroy it. Trash it. Picture number 1 is your squash vine borers doing the tango. Picture number 2 is damage to the stem. This is kind of what you're looking for. You can also see the worm coming out of the stem. Picture number 3 is the entry point at the stem. If you'll look, it's right at soil level, and there's little entry points there. And then picture number 4 are the eggs laid on the underside of the leaves. The best option I've found is to use a container, like a pan, a pail, or a bowl, that's colored yellow and filled with water. A squash vine borer adult will be attracted to the yellow. They will fly to the container and be trapped when they fall in the water. The chemical active ingredients that are effective against squash vine borers are carbaryl, permethrin, and bifenthrin. Note, borers don't attack butternut squash, cucumbers, melons, or watermelons. Let's go on to best practices. Rotation, rotation, rotation. So you don't have enough space to rotate. And by rotate, I mean don't plant squash in the same place for at least 3 years. Try using something like grow bags or containers and potting soil. Container and grow bags need more watering and monitoring as they dry out faster. So I recommend you obtain a moisture meter if you're going to go this route. You'll want to be moist to the depth of at least 4 inches inside the grow bag or the container. Never, never reuse potting soil previously used to grow squash. Remember, the pests and diseases winter over in the soil. And be sure to sanitize the container or grow bag at the end of the season. As you can tell, I'm a grow bag advocate for problem crops. The first picture here is my deck with a grow bag placed on the other side of the railing. It does very nicely, and the railing's an automatic trellis. Grow bags even work in a raised bed, as you can see here. Just need to be sure to provide, again, trellising for them. We move on now to diseases, which occur later in the year, mid-July to the end of the growing season. Powdery mildew, usually caused by irregular watering, overhead watering, air, wind, soil, insects, and stress. In other words, just about everything. Ugly as it may look, know that the plants usually coat with powdery mildew. If you choose to treat your plants with fungicides or products containing sulfur, go on the upper and undersides of the leaves when you treat, and you'll need to begin at the first sign you have a problem and repeat the treatment often according to instructions. There are treatments you can use, but mildew has developed a resistance to several classes of fungicides. Sulfur is a classic fungicide that is effective for controlling powdery mildew, but the catch is that it must be applied preventatively in advance of having a problem. Downy mildew is a common foliar disease in the Northeast, mainly because the pathogen produces a large quantity of asexual spores that are easily dispersed long distances by the wind. Downy mildew does not affect fruit directly, but affected leaves die prematurely, resulting in fewer fruit and/or fruit of low quality could be misshapen, poor flavor, sun scald, poor storability. In these photos, please note the mottled or blotchy-looking leaves containing yellow spots and in some areas looking brown. When you see these signs, you have a problem. This mildew has developed resistance to several classes of fungicide. Chlorothalonil and mangozeb are the main protectant fungicides for downy mildew. Copper is not as effective. Most fungicides labeled for downy mildew are also labeled for Phytophthora blight. With blossom end rot, the ends of fruit blacken and rot. This is usually due to an uneven soil moisture, a low pH, stress, too much nitrogen, or it could also be a possible lack of calcium. You should refer to soil tests previously taken for steps to correct if it is calcium deficiency. Other causes are unusually cool or hot weather, drought, or wet soil. To help prevent blossom end rot, water deeply and mulch your plants. Keep the fruits off the ground by using slates, tile, or squash trivets. Be sure to trellis your vines. The less contact the plant has with the soil, the better. Phytophthora blight is an Oomycete pathogen, which is an algae-like fungi, and this causes rot and blight to all parts of the plant. This fungi is brought on by rain and overhead watering, which spread the disease as it tends to travel in water. Its appearance is like powdered sugar and has a fluffy look. Chlorothalonil and mangozeb are the main fungicides you should use. Steps to control this disease include cleaning all equipment before using, never composting these plant materials, and applying fungicides preventatively at short intervals. No single method is available to provide adequate control of the blight. Rotate squash crops to a different area every year for 3 years. Recommendations for harvesting and storage of your squash are as follows. For summer squash, think shiny skin, tiny or small fruit, and tender, to be eaten within a week while fresh. For winter squash, think dull, hard rind, firm, heavy fruit to be harvested before the first hard freeze, and they can be kept after curing 3 months or longer. To cure most winter squash after harvest, make sure they are clean and dry. Keep them at a temperature between 80 and 85 with relative humidity of 75 to 80% for approximately 10 days. But acorn squash need to be cured a different way in a cool, dry area like a cellar. Note that temperatures below 50 degrees Fahrenheit cause chilling injury to the fruit. I hope you find this information useful. Thank you for attending this workshop, and I wish you a successful squash growing season.